No matter how you measure sympathetic nervous system activity in fibromyalgia, it is abnormal. This video looks at studies that demonstrate problems in the brain areas that control the sympathetic nervous system in fibromyalgia. These brain imaging studies actually support the idea that the sympathetic nervous system is hyperactive in fibromyalgia, and we see abnormal levels of function and abnormal levels of connection between parts of the brain that are not seen in healthy brains. To understand the brain evidence without being a neurologist, we first need to look a little bit more into what the sympathetic nervous system is and how the brain normally regulates it, and then look at some of the ways that this goes awry in fibromyalgia. So the autonomic nervous system is the autopilot nervous system. You can think of it as sort of the part of the body that regulates most of those housekeeping functions, all those automatic activities that we don't think about, things like heart rate and breathing and digestion. The autonomic nervous system, or this autopilot nervous system, has two branches, which are like two different modes. The sympathetic nervous system, or the parasympathetic nervous system. So the brain regulates the function of the body by either pressing on the accelerator, which is the sympathetic nervous system, which really prepares our body for action. This is why it's also called the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system really is more like the brake, and it prepares our body for rest. This is why it's often called the rest and digest system. Normally, the autonomic nervous system, the autopilot, should be fluid back and forth, mostly in the rest and digest mode, just bumping up into a little sympathetic activity when the body needs it. But the autonomic balance gets damaged in fibromyalgia, and our brains and bodies are constantly in the sympathetic nervous system or fight or flight mode. In my opinion, it is this abnormality that causes a chain reaction that ultimately leads to all the symptoms of fibromyalgia, including fatigue, brain fog, and pain. Hello, I'm Dr. Ginevra. I'm a physician with fibromyalgia myself, and I've dedicated my career to figuring out this incredibly frustrating illness. I share my findings with you here in my research library and in my book, The FibroManual. So brain imaging studies support the idea that the sympathetic nervous system is hyperactive in fibromyalgia. To understand the brain evidence, though, we first need to look at how the brain normally regulates the sympathetic nervous system. How is it normally regulating the balance between that accelerator and brake? When is it normally, and what parts of the brain regulate which mode the autopilot nervous system is in? And then we can look at all the ways that this goes wrong in fibromyalgia. Keep in mind, neuroscience is intricate and complex, and believe me, writing these posts and doing these videos required me to dig deep back into my medical school days and my medical school textbooks. And honestly, brain science is pretty rapidly evolving. We're finding newer and better ways to study the brain. So I think even most generalist healthcare providers, if they're honest with themselves, probably are a little bit rusty on some of the more intricate details of brain function. So my aim here is to share information with you that is accurate and it's clear and also accessible to everyone. So let's start with a refresher about the role of the sympathetic nervous system. As I said, it operates one side of the autonomic nervous system, that autopilot nervous system. In a simplistic way, we can think of the sympathetic nervous system sort of being run by the hypothalamus in the brain. Certainly that's what I learned in medical school. However, it's really part of a small leadership network, a committee of different brain areas that together kind of manage this large and complicated nerve network. So let's ease our way in and start looking at some of these brain areas that control autonomic nervous system function, and then see where it's misfiring in fibromyalgia. So there's a few ways that scientists can measure brain activity. The first is with specialized brain scans called functional MRIs. These measure blood and oxygen levels in the brain to detect activity in different parts. So the areas that light up in the functional MRI brain imaging, as you see here, these are all the areas that contribute to running or managing the autonomic nervous system. And you can see there's quite a bit. And so it's the red and orange and yellow areas all over the brain at different levels. You can see that there's parts of the brain that are involved. So it's a complicated system. And this leadership committee is often more appropriately called kind of the central autonomic network. It's like a network of different parts of the brain that together are controlling this complicated nervous system, whether you're in sympathetic or parasympathetic mode, accelerator or brake. So it's like a committee of people driving the car. There's parts of the brain in the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system and the brainstem and the hypothalamus that all act together. But the hypothalamus is sort of the captain of this motley crew, so to speak. Functional MRIs of the brain can show which parts of the brain are active at any one time, but it's a static snapshot, like a picture of a sports team. You can just really tell who's there, who's present on picture day. You get much more useful information about how a team plays by seeing how they act together, seeing how they play the game. So the functional MRIs can also be modified to more look for connections or functional pathways between different areas of the brain. And by using this technique, researchers have identified 4 key areas of the brain that regulate the sympathetic nervous system. And these seem to have especially strong connections to each other. This includes the insula, the hypothalamus, and 2 areas in the brainstem, periaqueductal gray and rostral ventrolateral medulla, or RVLM. That is a mouthful. These together form a brain circuit or a loop that runs the sympathetic nervous system show. Because it works in a loop, in this kind of functional pathway, scientists have termed this brain circuit the human sympathetic connectome. Several of these key areas of the sympathetic nervous system control brain circuit show abnormal activity in fibromyalgia, including in the insula, hypothalamus, and periaqueductal gray. One study looked at how the fibromyalgia brain responds to painful stimuli, and they found increased connection between the posterior cingulate cortex and the thalamus compared to healthy brains. The posterior cingulate and the thalamus are adjacent to this brain loop, and they're very important in how the body interprets pain signals. So this enhanced connectivity between the central autonomic network and the thalamus, which is the main pain relay station of the brain, this enhanced connectivity may be one way that the fibromyalgia brain is paying more attention to painful stimuli. We may actually be seeing part of the brain mechanism which causes the hyperalgesia, the amplification of pain signals, also called central sensitization, that is such a strong finding in fibromyalgia. Another study found that levels of increased connectivity between the periaqueductal gray and other brain regions involved in the autonomic nervous system signaling process varied with a participant's pain score, meaning stronger connections between the autonomic nervous system regulation areas were seen in those people that described higher pain scores. In addition to this core leadership team, there are other parts of the brain that play key roles in managing the sympathetic nervous system, and they aren't working correctly in fibromyalgia either. Imaging studies reveal higher levels of activity and connections between other brain regions in charge of the sympathetic nervous system, including the thalamus, locus coeruleus, and parabrachial nuclei, as shown here. And then the plot thickens. Here's where things start to get really interesting, because many of the areas in the brain that are involved in autonomic nervous system regulation are also involved in pain. The autonomic nervous system and the pain networks of the brain are deeply intertwined, and they reflect almost a coordinating system that together manages both pain and autonomic regulation. It's like two mighty rivers that combine forces before they together dump into the ocean. These two brain systems really play a huge role in fibromyalgia pain. Now, the interactions can go both ways. So on the one hand, pain can affect how the autonomic nervous system functions. And on the other hand, alterations in autonomic nervous system function can influence the experience of pain. This is because there's so much functional overlap between structures involved in both autonomic control and pain sensation at multiple different levels, including in the spinal cord, the brainstem, the midbrain, and in the cortex. So with all this overlap, the ability of the autonomic nervous system to modulate pain information is not surprising. And in the context of pain, a healthy autonomic nervous system balance is really key in managing the volume of pain signals. And when the autonomic nervous system is malfunctioning, like it is in fibromyalgia, when our sympathetic nervous system component is really when that accelerator is being pressed all the time, the brain has less ability to properly regulate pain signals, properly block some pain signals, and instead pain volume really spins out of control. Now, the autonomic nervous system and pain control networks are actually both kind of broken in the fibromyalgia brain, and they certainly negatively impact each other. But it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg conundrum as to which came first. It's not clear how much the altered autonomic nervous system brain signaling results from altered pain processing versus how much it is causing the pain processing. But how does this abnormal brain sympathetic nervous system activity fit into the big picture of what's happening in fibromyalgia? Well, sympathetic nervous system hyperactivity is key to generating the fibromyalgia chain reaction, in my opinion. It's as if a switch is flipped on in the brain that pushes the autonomic nervous system, that controlling network, into the sympathetic mode, and it gets stuck there. And because the sympathetic nervous system is involved in so many different aspects of body functions, including immune system and pain regulation, this sets off a chain reaction that affects almost every body system. And ultimately, I think it's that results in abnormal pain processing, that central sensitization, or more recently called nociplastic pain, that's really the most widely recognized problem scientifically in fibromyalgia. I view central sensitization as almost the end result of this chain reaction that really starts in the sympathetic nervous system brain network. So it's really important to understand how the areas of the brain in fibromyalgia that are regulating the sympathetic nervous system are not working well. So to sum up, we see higher activity and stronger connections between parts of the brain running the sympathetic nervous system in fibromyalgia. And I'm not the only one that has thought this. One article wrote, "It is likely that the overall increase of sympathetic activity we have observed in fibromyalgia patients may take part in the central nervous system sensitization process, thus playing a crucial role in generating and sustaining chronic pain." You can find more in-depth coverage of this topic, including references, at fibroresearch.org. There you can also join my mailing list where I'll keep you updated on new research. For treatment information, you can head to my book, The FibroManual, which was just released in audio form, which I'm very excited about. I hope this video is helpful to you in your journey to understanding fibromyalgia. Thank you for watching.